So it's been about a week and a half since we had UFC 300, the biggest pay-per-view card of all time in UFC history. So I wanted to take a look back at the card as a whole and determine, was UFC 300 really that good? Because we've seen Dana White, we've seen all the promoters, everybody who watched that card pretty much glaze it to oblivion. So it's time for us to take a look back at it and see how good was UFC 300 really. So in this video today, I'm going to go through the entire card and kind of give my cliff notes of every single fight to determine how good was UFC 300. At the end of the video, I'm going to give it a score 1 through 10. It's going to be very specific, and I might even make this a series after every single pay-per-view where I go through the entire card and give it a nice little score, a nice little review, so we can look back at the end of the year to determine which was the best pay-per-view card of that year. So without further ado, let's dive right into this video. So I think the best way to go about this is actually by going through every single fight from worst to best. Ranking every single fight allows me to determine what really was a bad fight and what really was a good fight and what really got us entertained and what made this card actually really special. Now, starting off with what I think was the worst fight on the card, I think it goes to Calvin Kattar versus Aljamain Sterling. Pretty clearly, this fight was abysmal. All it pretty much was Aljo full camping, crotch sniffing, taking down Calvin Kattar for 3 rounds and holding him down, not doing any damage, not getting any submission attempts. There really wasn't much from Aljo this entire fight. This fight was pretty much, it was a snooze fest. It kind of ruined the flow of the card. We just had Kayla Harrison finish Holm. We just had Lopes pull off a great KO against Sodiq Yusuff. So this fight coming up after those fights happened really kind of made the card stinky. It really just ruined the flow of the card. It didn't make things better. Aljamain Sterling had a good performance, I'll say this, but it was a very boring style. It was not entertaining to watch. It wasn't even technical grappling with a lot of scrambles, just pretty much decent wrestling with full guard camping, half guard camping against the cage camping. It was a pretty boring fight. And then I'll go ahead and rate Jessica Andrade versus Marina Rodriguez being the second worst fight of that night. This fight was, I think, a little bit below average. It wasn't a crazy good fight. It wasn't an amazing fight, but it wasn't a terrible stinker of a fight. I think it just sits barely below average. It wasn't good, wasn't great, but at least it was, I wouldn't even call it watchable, but it was somewhat watchable. The only good moment that I believe we had was when Rodriguez got hurt at the end of the second round. That pretty much was about it. I think the first round was Andrade full guard camping for a little bit and kicking the legs of Marina Rodriguez, but overall, it wasn't really a good fight really to watch. It wasn't terrible by any means, but it wasn't a crazy fight. And then after that, I have to go with Bo Nickal versus Cody Brundage. This was pretty much pure domination from Bo Nickal from the start. There was one good moment where I think Brundage landed one good punch, and that was pretty much it. Overall, it was just Brundage trying to survive, scrambling a lot, getting taken down, having his back taken, and then eventually Bo Nickal submits him with a choke. It wasn't the crazy one punch KO that we're used to seeing from Bo Nickal or a crazy quick takedown then submission from Bo Nickal. It was still a great performance, and it was a good win from Bo Nickal. Sorry, not Bro Nickal, but Bo Nickal. But it wasn't a exciting fight. It really just was him taking him down and holding him there, and that pretty much was it. Not much from that. Again, it was a great win from Bo Nickal, but was this fight truly UFC 300 worthy? No. Did it even deserve to be on the main card of UFC 300? No way. Bo Nickal just pretty much snubbed Jiri Prochazka versus Rakic. That fight was way better and deserved to be on the main card over Bo Nickal, but you know what? It is what it is. That was the past. We can't change it, but this fight just wasn't really an exciting fight whatsoever. Now, this is where things get kind of tricky, and you can go several different ways here in terms of which fight you think was better than the other fight, but I'm going to go ahead and put Figueiredo versus Garbrandt on here. This fight, again, wasn't a crazy fight. It wasn't really even that amazing of a fight. I do think it was better than Bo Nickal, but it mainly just was Garbrandt getting the edge in the first round and then getting choked out in the second round. At least there was a finish on here, so that does give it some points. But other than that, very average fight. A very, very average fight. I think the aura, I think the name value saved it for the most part. In terms of fight quality, it was a pretty average fight. There was a finish, so like it does give it some plus points, but overall, again, it was a very average fight. And so the next fight that I have up next is Charles Oliveira versus Arman Tsarukyan. Now, name value here and the stakes make this a very fun watch, in my opinion. I think the value, like being an Oliveira fan myself and knowing how risky this is versus Tsarukyan, knowing that Oliveira, if he wins this fight, probably can get a title shot up next that will later be given to Dustin Poirier, because I don't know. But at the time when I was watching this fight, I was thinking if the winner of this doesn't take too much damage, they might get the next title shot versus Islam Makhachev. The fight, it was Tsarukyan getting takedowns, full guard camping. He did have some good elbows at one point, but overall, it really just was Tsarukyan. In the first round, Oliveira had a locked-in guillotine that he almost choked out Tsarukyan with, and at the end, he had an anaconda choke that he almost got Tsarukyan with. So there was exciting moments. The elbows from Tsarukyan and full guard were also good as well. So there were moments in this fight that were good and exciting to watch. But in between that, there really just wasn't much. It was mainly just Tsarukyan taking down Oliveira, holding him there, full guard camping. Not much really to take away from this. It really just was, I would say, a little bit above average fight here, because there was some good, exciting moments, and the aura did kind of carry it. So that makes it a little bit better when you have Oliveira, who's a big name in the UFC, fighting on a card. But in terms of fight quality, again, I say besides the guillotine attempts and the submission attempts, this fight was meh. Now up next, we have Jalin Turner versus Renato Moicano. This fight was pretty lame, I would say. It was Renato Moicano full guard camping for the majority of this fight. Besides one moment where Jalin Turner pretty much had a finish laid on the table for him. Let's be real here. Jalin Turner fumbled this entire fight. If he just finished Moicano when he dropped him really bad with a right hand, I believe, he could have finished Moicano, and that could have been the fight. This fight probably would have been better, but Turner drops Moicano in the end of the first round and then just goes for a walk-off KO. Moicano is still in it. He's still fine. And that was exciting. That was cool to watch, and that gives it some points. But other than that, it was Moicano just grappling up Jalin Turner and then eventually getting a, I would say, underwhelming finish with ground and pound and full mount. Yeah, I mean, without the Turner knockdown and the Moicano finish, this fight probably would have been one of the worst fights on the card. But those two moments really carried it a lot. I think those moments were a little bit better because we almost saw a flatline KO from Turner, where we didn't get that with Oliveira versus Tsarukyan. But overall, this fight just barely, I'd say barely outdoes Tsarukyan and Oliveira because of the knockdown and the finish. And then next fight we have is Holm versus Kayla Harrison. This just was pure domination from Kayla Harrison, which was fun to watch actually from a women's fight. Typically women's fights, they don't really have that entertaining or that high stakes value, but Kayla Harrison kind of brought a little breath of fresh air in the women's divisions, especially at women's bantamweight. We've been waiting for somebody since Nunes retired to at least make us interested in women's bantamweight, and Kayla Harrison is that next person. Now, Kayla Harrison, she dominated. The fight overall was just a pretty much one-way traffic from her. She pretty much dominated Holm for the first two rounds, and she showed not the best striking ability, but she can get takedowns. That is her main game, and she took down Holm, who had a pretty, awful game plan. Holm is, I believe, has a really good boxing credential on her record. I forget what her boxing credential is, but it's a pretty high-level boxing award that she has. And she decides to clinch with Kayla Harrison, who is known for having elite judo. Like, I think any game plan would have been not to clinch with Kayla Harrison and not let her get takedowns or judo throws on you, but somehow Holm just couldn't help herself. So that was pretty funny to watch, in my opinion. It might have been frustrating if you bet on Holm, but to me that was hilarious to watch pretty much her have the lowest IQ game plan of all time against Kayla Harrison. But this fight was, again, not the most entertaining, but it was a pretty good, it was very watchable. I would say that. It was very, very watchable. And I would say Kayla Harrison, with her dominating as well as she did, you could put this lower than Oliveira Tsarukyan or even not doing Moicano versus Jalin Turner. I don't mind where you put this, honestly. I don't really care that much. but I do think Kayla Harrison had a good performance, and she got a submission finish, which is rare nowadays for women's fights. So I'm giving Kayla Harrison a nice, good, healthy spot on this ranking video. So you're welcome. Now it's time where I think this card kind of has a pretty clear shift, and from I think fights that are just kind of average, a little bit above average, kind of good. I think right now we get into fights that are actually really good, like really good fights that we had. And I think the worst of the really good fights that we had was Weili Zhang versus Yan Xiaoan. This fight was actually kind of a low-key banger. I hate to say it, and I know the crowd was dead the entire time, but I mean, we had Weili Zhang get knocked down, I mean, so many times. She got dropped, I don't know how many times in a fight. I don't know the official numbers, but she got dropped, it felt like every single round. She choked out Yan Xiaoan at the end of the first round, I believe. Literally choked her unconscious, and somehow Yan Xiaoan had the, I guess, awareness to stand back up and get back to her stool. They had to wake her up on the stool in between rounds. This fight actually had some excitement to it. Now, it looked very untechnical. I've never seen Weili Zhang throw strikes like how she did. I thought she was a better striker than that. It just seemed like she just didn't know how to strike anymore. So that gives it some minus points because it just didn't look like a technical high-level MMA fight. But at the end of the day, man, it did have its moments. It was exciting for the most part. It wasn't the most exciting I've ever seen a fight, but it was at least decent enough to make me make it watchable, man. It was actually more than watchable. It was a good fight. I enjoyed watching Weili Zhang get dropped almost every single round and almost took out Yan Xiaoan. Now, did I care that much? No, I don't really care about women's strawweight too incredibly much, but I think in a vacuum watching this fight, it was a pretty decent scrap and I liked it. I enjoyed it for the most part. Now up next, we have Sodiq Yusuff versus Diego Lopes. Not much of a fight here, honestly. It just was Diego Lopes getting a pretty quick first round finish. In fact, the fight only lasted a minute and a half. So Diego Lopes, crazy performance. It actually was, for as long as it lasted, it was very exciting. A little short uppercut in the clinch knocks down Sodiq Yusuff. Diego Lopes has incredible finishing ability. There's not really much to say about this fight other than the fact that Lopes had a great performance, and for as long as the fight lasted, it was exciting. It was fireworks. The only way I can really take points from this fight was how short it was, but overall, great fight. Great fight. It was a great finish. Diego Lopes, again, has some of the best finishing ability or finishing potential. Once he hurts somebody, it seems like he's going to put you away pretty easily. Again, it's a great fight, but there just isn't much to say because it was so short. Now on to a fight that was very exciting, but wasn't as short as Lopes versus Yusuff. We have Jiri Prochazka versus Aleksander Rakic. I mean, the entire time when I'm watching this fight, I'm like, holy shit, Rakic is actually messing up Jiri right now. He's actually piecing him up. The low kicks are really taking effect on Jiri. But Jiri, the tank that he is, just tanks through all the low kicks and pretty much just walks down Rakic and then finishes him. He pretty much just toughed through the entire first and second round and found a way to put down Rakic. What a crazy fight. What an exciting fight. It was damage. There was action. It really did feel like at any point either of these guys could get a finish or put the other one out. And it just overall, it had that aura, you know, it had that good build up to it. Now the build up wasn't insane. It really just was Rakic saying that Prochazka isn't a samurai, which I guess is all you really need to get Jiri to go after you like that. Not really, that's just how Jiri fights, but there at least was some, I guess, narrative to it. I don't really know. I think any Jiri fan was happy to watch this fight. They might have been crying in the first round, like, oh my God, Rakic is actually beating this guy up. But I think once he got the finish, you were like, holy shit, Jiri is him. It does not matter how much damage you do to him. He's going to keep coming at you, going to keep being in your face, and then he's going to put you down just with volume and just being tougher than you, just being grittier than you. And this fight pretty much just embodied how great the top of light heavyweight is right now. And it can only get better, man. We might see Jiri in a title fight here soon. There's some good matchups for him, but this fight overall was just, it was very, very good. It was, I would say, like an A- in terms of just overall fights. Now, next up, this may come as a shocker, but I am going to put the main event, Alex Pereira versus Jamahal on there. Sick finish. I mean, chattiest finish of all time. One of the most crazy moments in UFC history. Alex Pereira getting hit in the cup, getting hit in the balls, stopping Herb Dean, then proceeding to left hook KO Jamahal into the shadow realm was diffy. It was an elite moment. We will be talking about this finish for years upon years, for a very long time to say the least. Now, in between that, it was just low kicks at range. Let's be real here. The finish, it carried it. It made the fight what it is. Still a great fight though. Still a great finish, and it had that main event build up. It had that worthiness to it. Jamahal was going in on Alex Pereira the entire time. Overall, it was for as long as it lasted, it was a pretty good scrap, pretty good fight. It felt competitive for at least a little bit. They both were landing low kicks for the most part, but Pereira had one of the best finishes that we've ever seen in UFC history. The moment carries so much because we're going to remember that for years and years and years to come. Pereira finishing Jamahal in the way that he did is going to be cemented forever. And I think anybody who watched this as a casual fan or maybe even a new UFC fan, they're going to never forget that. Just never forget it. And that to me has to put it high on this ranking list for UFC 300 fights. It just has to. There's no question about it. It's at number 3, I believe, but we have 2 more fights left to go. Moving on to what I think was the second best fight of UFC 300, I do have Bobby Green versus Jim Miller. Now, this fight was a lot of Bobby Green piecing up Jim Miller, but Jim Miller had his moments. This to me should have been fight of the night over Holloway versus Gaethje. Jim Miller several times dropped or hurt Bobby Green. He landed good punches. In between that, it was Bobby Green pretty much messing up Jim Miller to eventually dropping him in the 3rd round and really beating him up in that 3rd round. Overall, it just felt really competitive, and it felt like a good fight. And at any moment, it felt like either of these guys could get finished or KO'd. This truly felt like a war almost. Now, wasn't mainly Bobby Green doing most of the damage and most of the strikes for sure, but he was also talking shit in the octagon, talking trash to Jim Miller. Jim Miller was landing good power punches on Bobby Green. It just felt like a great fight. This was an A fight. I can't give it anything else. Now, is this fight an all-time classic? Will it be a Hall of Fame fight? No way. But I think in terms of, if you put us in a vacuum and just analyze the fight, this was one of the most exciting fights we had on UFC 300. I think this is the second best fight on UFC 300. This might be a hot take, I don't know, but I think this fight is just really underrated. We literally had Jim Miller with his whole face covered in blood. Bobby Green got hurt several times. This was a war, kind of I would say more one-sided war, but at least it was a war, and I really enjoyed watching this. This is, again, one of the best fights on the card, and in fact, it is the second best fight on the card. Now, moving on to the best fight on this card, you know what it's going to be. It's going to be Justin Gaethje versus Max Holloway. Now, I could use my own logic against me, and mainly just was Max Holloway dominating Gaethje to eventually getting one of the best finishes ever in UFC history, if not the best finish of all time. Again, this moment is just going to carry on legacy for years and years and years to come. I can't get enough of it. I've watched this finish a million times. I can't tell you how many times I've watched Max Holloway point down in the middle of the octagon and told Justin Gaethje, let's scrap it out in the last 10 seconds, to eventually landing a overhand right that puts him completely out cold. That moment is going to live on forever. Just forever. It just simply doesn't get any better than that. It just simply doesn't. I can't really describe too much about the fight. It really just was Holloway just being better than Justin Gaethje everywhere on the feet, pretty much. It was Holloway dominating Gaethje. Gaethje had one good round in the 4th, I believe, which I do believe I gave him that round winning. But other than that, it was 4-1 Holloway, and if he didn't get that finish, I probably would have put this fight lower on the ranking list, but that finish just... it's different. You can't debate that. This finish from Holloway is one of the best finishes of all time. He had Ilia Topuria shitting his pants, octagon side. Everybody was reacting like crazy. I mean, there's so much content. There's so much value from this. Like I said before, when it came to Alex Pereira versus Jamahal, if you are a new or a casual fan and you saw that finish, you will never forget that finish for pretty much as long as you live. You'll be 50 years old telling your kid about UFC 300, and you'll say, man, that Max Holloway, when he put Gaethje out like that, you will tell your kids about this fight. And that simply is enough for me to put it at number one and pretty much etch this card in the stone of history, or whatever the phrase might be. So this card overall was amazing. It simply was an amazing card. It delivered. There were some stinkers on here, but this card was one of the best cards of all time. I'm glad I watched all 7.5 hours of it. And so when I do rate this card, I have to give it an official number of a 9.4. The Aljo fight really tanks it. You know what I mean? If the Aljo fight was a halfway decent fight, it'd be like a 9.8, you know, but that Aljo fight really brings it down a ton. And I guess some other fights did have a lot of dominance in it and just one-way traffic, and that made it kind of lame. But other than that, man, there's just, when you have two moments like Pereira versus Jamahal Hill and Holloway versus Gaethje, when you have moments like that that are going to be etched in history, that makes this card just really special, just one of a kind. We've had, I would say, pretty lackluster UFC pay-per-views as of recently for, I think, the past year and a half. But this card, it was everything it was supposed to be. It wasn't perfect. It's not like every fight was an absolute war, but we got finishes. We got historic moments. We had wars. We got everything we wanted from this fight, besides maybe Aljo kind of ruining it. And I actually really like Aljo. I would say I'm a fan, but his fight was just so stinky. It just brought down the hype of the card. It kind of made it a bit dull afterwards because he just half guard camped for 3 rounds against Calvin Kattar. It is what it is. But overall, again, this card is a 9.4. I believe that this card it is one of the best cards of all time, if not the best card of all time. But I'm done. I'm tired. I've made 2 videos today. I'm out of here, guys. Like, subscribe, hit that bell icon for notifications. In the comment section down below, tell me how you felt about UFC 300. What would you rate the card on a scale 1 through 10? But I'm out of here. Peace.